Racist cop tries to intimidate black woman. Her diplomatic status stops him. In this eye-opening video, we delve into a shocking encounter that highlights ongoing racial tensions and the misuse of power by law enforcement. A black woman finds herself targeted by a police officer whose actions are driven by racial bias. This incident serves as a stark reminder of the challenges that marginalized communities face when dealing with authorities. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
4 more meaningful stories. Saturday afternoon in Westwood Heights was bathed in bright golden sunlight. The neat houses lined up along the quiet street where children cycled happily and adults chatted comfortably in their front yards. This was a community that everyone proudly called home, a place where the close-knit and safe living environment was the dream of many families. At house number 22 at the end of the street, Emily Carter, a black woman with a radiant smile, was preparing for her son Nathan's 8th birthday party. The kitchen was filled with laughter, the clinking of plates and cheerful tunes playing from a small speaker on the table. Emily, in her white apron covered in flour stains, swiftly pulled freshly baked cupcakes out of the oven. "Do you want more candy on your cake, Nathan?" Emily asked, her eyes soft as she looked at her son. Nathan, wearing his favorite superhero-themed t-shirt, eagerly nodded. "Yes, I want all the candy to be green." He giggled, his eyes sparkling with joy as he watched his mother decorate the small cakes. The living room was colorfully decorated with balloons floating everywhere, and the long table was ready for the party. Red plastic plates were neatly arranged next to a 2-tier birthday cake that Emily had stayed up all night to bake. Everything in the house reflected the thoughtfulness and love Emily had for her son. Outside the window, neighbors walked by, stopping to smile and wave, some even shouting, "Happy birthday, Nathan." The fresh air in the neighborhood and the warmth from those around her made this day feel perfect. Emily felt proud of the home she had built, not just a house, but a place full of beautiful memories and family love. But then, amidst the peaceful scene, a knock on the door suddenly rang out. At first, it was a soft knock, as if someone politely wanted to enter. Emily frowned and glanced at the clock on the wall. Could it be that someone arrived early? She wondered. The second knock was louder, with a bit more tension. Emily set the cake she was decorating on the table, removed her apron, and walked to the door. Through the frosted glass, she briefly saw 2 figures in police uniforms. "What's going on?" Emily whispered, trying to stay calm as she opened the door. In front of her stood 2 police officers, one tall and stern-looking, and the other younger, but with a hard gaze. Both had their hands casually resting on their belts where their guns were holstered. "Good afternoon," one of them, Officer John Reynolds, said in a serious tone. "We've received a report of a suspicious person entering this house. We need you to step outside immediately." Emily froze, looking at them in surprise. "Break in? This is my house. There must be some mistake," Reynolds repeated, this time with a firmer voice. "We need you to step outside immediately so we can verify your identity." Not wanting to make a scene in front of her son or the neighbors, Emily took a deep breath. "All right, I'll cooperate. But I assure you, you've made a mistake." As she stepped outside, Reynolds immediately grabbed her wrist, spun her around, and yanked both arms behind her, the sound of handcuffs clicking coldly as her wrists were locked into place. "Hey, this is my house." Emily struggled, her voice a mix of confusion and anger. "You can't do this." Reynolds ignored her protests, coldly stating, "You are under arrest for illegal entry. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." Inside the house, Nathan stood frozen, his eyes wide as he watched his mother being handcuffed at the doorstep. The boy screamed, "Mom!" Nathan's cries pierced Emily's heart like a knife. She turned, shouting in desperation, "Nathan, I'm fine. Stay with Miss Lisa. I'll take care of this." But inside, a feeling of fear and injustice washed over her. The whispers of neighbors outside, the phones being raised to record the scene, it all felt like a nightmare. The storm Emily never expected had officially arrived. The murmurs of the neighbors grew louder, and some started walking closer to see what was happening. Across the street, Mr. Peter, a middle-aged man who lived alone, stood silently observing from his yard. He was the one who had called the police just minutes earlier. When Peter saw an unfamiliar man enter Emily's house, a family friend who had arrived early to help with the party preparations, he immediately became suspicious. In his eyes, anyone unfamiliar with the neighborhood was someone to be investigated. When he saw Emily talking to this man through the door, despite the clear scene of a birthday party, Peter decided to call the police, reporting that a suspicious person was breaking into the house. Officers Reynolds and Martinez responded to the call and arrived on the scene, but instead of checking the information or approaching cautiously, they acted solely on Peter's unfounded report. Reynolds, who led the charge, was very determined. "This is a situation that needs to be handled immediately," he told Martinez as they approached Emily's house. "We can't let an intruder slip away." As soon as Emily stepped outside, Martinez quickly realized that this wasn't a typical break-in. He glanced over Emily's shoulder, noticing the house was decorated for a birthday party. But he didn't dare speak up due to Reynolds's decisiveness. "This is exactly what we were told," Reynolds asserted, his voice firm. "This house doesn't seem to belong to you. Now, you need to explain why you're here." Emily looked at the officers in surprise. "I don't need to explain anything. This is my house. My son is in there and we're just having a birthday party." But her explanation had no effect. Reynolds interrupted. "We don't have time for arguments. Step away from the house now." Not wanting to escalate the situation further, Emily complied. But as soon as she stepped across the threshold, Reynolds twisted her arm behind her and handcuffed her tightly. "What are you doing?" Emily screamed, both scared and furious. "This is my house. Check my papers or ask the neighbors, they all know me." "You are resisting an officer," Reynolds responded coldly. "If you don't cooperate, we'll add obstruction to the charges." Martinez stood silently, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing. The crowd of neighbors was growing larger, some raising their phones to record the scene. Whispers and discontent spread everywhere. "This is Emily. She's lived here for so long. This is ridiculous. Why didn't they check before arresting her?" Inside the house, Nathan stood as if frozen. He looked through the door, tears welling up as he saw his mother handcuffed and dragged away in front of everyone. Miss Lisa, Nathan's caretaker, quickly embraced him, trying to comfort him. "I want Mom," Nathan screamed, trying to run outside, but Lisa held him back. Emily turned back, her eyes blazing as she glared at Reynolds. "Can't you see? It's my son's birthday. This is my house." Reynolds remained unfazed. "Everything will be cleared up at the station. Now, you need to stay quiet." His cold words felt like a deep insult to Emily. She lifted her head, looking straight at Martinez, and said, her voice full of anger, "Do you think this is right? Can't you see everything around you? Please, think about it." Martinez avoided her gaze, clearly hesitant. But before he could say anything, Reynolds pulled Emily toward the patrol car, ignoring all the pleas and dissatisfaction from the crowd. Next door, Peter still stood there, his face expressionless as he watched the events unfold. He never imagined that his call would lead to this. A mother being arrested right in front of her son, in front of the entire neighborhood. The storm of injustice had now spread, and it was just beginning. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder as Emily was led out of the house. Neighbors began to gather, their eyes filled with astonishment and anger as they witnessed Emily, someone they had known for years, being handcuffed right at their doorstep. Mrs. Linda, an elderly woman living across from Emily's house, stepped out of the crowd. With her silver hair neatly tied up and a determined gaze, she couldn't hide her outrage. "What is going on here? This is Emily Carter. She's lived here for so many years. What are you doing?" Mrs. Linda shouted, her voice rising above the noise of the crowd. Reynolds glanced at her with annoyance. "Ma'am, we're carrying out a duty. Please do not interfere." "Interfere? You've got the wrong person," Mrs. Linda continued, walking closer to Emily. "Ask anyone in this neighborhood and they'll tell you this is her home. Didn't you see the birthday party inside? Or are you just judging her by the color of her skin and assuming she's a thief?" Reynolds frowned and stepped forward, his voice turning cold. "You should step back if you don't want to be charged with obstructing law enforcement." The crowd around them began to murmur. A few people raised their phones to record the scene, clearly outraged. A man in the crowd shouted, "This is outrageous. We're posting this online to show everyone what you're doing here." Another woman standing nearby, holding her young child, shook her head in anger. "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Everyone knows Emily. How could they think she's a burglar?" Reynolds, trying to maintain his composure but losing patience, roughly pulled Emily toward the patrol car. "We're just following procedure. If there's been a mistake, it will be addressed at the station." Emily turned back, her voice sharp but tinged with pain. "Procedure? Your procedure is to arrest someone in front of their child without checking anything. This is my home. Ask anyone here." Martinez, seemingly swayed by the pressure from the crowd, turned to Reynolds, his voice low but filled with concern. "John, maybe we should double-check. She has neighbors who can vouch for her. This isn't right." Reynolds snapped, "We can't lose control. If we start listening to every opinion from the crowd, we won't get anything done. Just take her in. Don't let emotions get in the way." Mrs. Linda stepped forward again, pointing at Martinez. "You're young. You can do the right thing. Don't let your superior push you into making a mistake." Martinez hesitated, his gaze drifting over the crowd before landing on Emily. She stood there, her hands still cuffed, but her fiery eyes seemed to silently say to him, "You know I'm right. Don't let this be a stain on your career." Outside, the crowd grew even larger, their voices turning into accusations and frustration. "Let her go," a man shouted. "This is discrimination." A young man in the crowd spoke up. "I've recorded everything. If you don't do the right thing, we're posting this online." The tension was palpable. Reynolds began to feel the pressure but still gripped Emily's arm tightly. Martinez, confused by the situation, turned back to look at Reynolds, his gaze uncertain. Amid the chaos, Nathan, the little boy standing inside, rushed to the door, crying out for his mother. "Mom, don't go." The sight of this sent the crowd into a frenzy. A neighbor yelled, "Don't you see this is destroying a family?" Reynolds gritted his teeth, trying to ignore the protests. "Everyone, keep calm. This is an investigation. If you don't cooperate, we'll take stronger action." But now, no one stepped back. The crowd moved closer, their eyes a mix of anger and solidarity. They knew this wasn't just about Emily. This was a warning to all of them. Emily was shoved into the back seat of the patrol car, the door slamming shut with a cold finality that echoed injustice. She sat there, her wrists aching from the tight cuffs, her gaze fixed on Nathan, her little boy, crying out for his mother, held by Mrs. Lisa. The sight of him tore at her heart, as if every effort she had made throughout her life to create a safe home had been ripped away in an instant. She took a deep breath, trying to suppress the rising tide of emotions. But in the suffocating silence of the patrol car, memories from the past suddenly came flooding back, one by one, dragging her back to old wounds she had buried long ago. She remembered her younger years when her belief in fairness and opportunity still felt intact. Emily had been an outstanding student, always top of her class with a promising future ahead. But the first time she truly understood what injustice meant was when she entered the job market. Emily recalled the day she applied for an internship at a prestigious media company. Her resume sparkled. High grades, impressive research awards, and extracurricular activities. She had walked into the interview room with confidence and a bright smile. But that smile quickly faded when the middle-aged white recruiter glanced over her resume for a few seconds and said flatly, "We're looking for a more suitable candidate. Thank you for coming." Emily remembered his gaze, not the look of someone assessing her skills, but one filled with prejudice. Later, she found out that the position had been given to a less experienced candidate who was a better fit for the company's image. An image that had no place for a black woman like her. The next memory hit her like a crashing wave. It was a late evening when Emily was driving home after a long work day. She turned on her indicator and slowly made a turn at an intersection when suddenly the flashing lights of a police car appeared behind her. Her heart raced as she pulled over, trying to remember what mistake she had made. The officer approached, asking for her documents. "Where are you headed at this hour?" he asked in a cold, suspicious tone. Emily, trying to stay calm, replied, "I just finished work and am on my way home." He checked her documents slowly, his gaze never leaving her, as if she were a threat. After what felt like an eternity, he returned her papers without a word of apology, simply saying, "Drive more carefully next time." Emily remembered sitting in the car, motionless, for a long time afterward, tears welling up from the humiliation. She hadn't broken any traffic laws, but her skin color seemed to be the only reason she had been stopped. There was another time when she and her husband, William, had gone out for dinner at a fancy restaurant to celebrate their anniversary. The server came to them and said, in a quiet but pointed tone, "Sorry, but we made a mistake. Your table's in the back." Emily had been ready to protest, but William gently placed his hand on hers and shook his head. After dinner, when they were leaving, William said, "Don't let those people diminish your worth. They don't know who you are, but I do, and that's all that matters." These memories, fragments of a life full of struggle and endurance, ignited a quiet but fierce anger inside Emily. She had always tried to overcome the injustices by proving her worth, but now, as she was being treated like a criminal in front of her son, she wondered if all her efforts had been enough. Through the patrol car window, Emily saw Mrs. Linda still standing there, her eyes full of rage and determination, along with other neighbors recording the incident on their phones. Emily could feel their support, and it gave her strength. She took a deep breath, her hands still trembling from both anger and pain, but her gaze had hardened with resolve. "I won't break," she told herself. "If I stay silent, if I give in, this will keep happening. I have to stand up. For Nathan, for myself, and for everyone who has ever been treated unjustly." Amid the whirlwind of memories and reality, Emily realized one thing clearly. This wasn't just a confrontation between her and the two police officers. It was part of a larger fight, a fight she had no choice but to take on, for herself and her community. Inside the patrol car, Emily struggled to remain calm, but the feeling of helplessness weighed heavily on her shoulders. Through the fogged glass, she saw Nathan, her little boy, desperately trying to break free from Mrs. Lisa's arms, running toward the car. The sight was like a knife to her heart, leaving an indelible, unhealable wound. "Mom! Mom!" Nathan screamed, his voice cracking through sobs. He tripped on the road, his knees scraping against the ground, but still picked himself up and charged toward the car with all his tiny strength. As Nathan got closer, his small hands slammed against the patrol car's window, the rapid knocks echoing in the tense air. "Let my mom go! Let my mom go!" he cried out, tears streaming down his cheeks, his voice carrying the pain and fear no child should ever have to feel. Emily watched her son through the glass, her heart torn apart. She wanted to rush out, pull Nathan into her arms, and reassure him that everything would be okay, that it was all just a misunderstanding and she would soon return. But the cuffs around her wrists and Officer Reynolds's cold stare prevented any action. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. "Nathan," she called, her voice trembling but firm. "Listen to me, my love. Everything will be fine. Stay with Mrs. Lisa, okay? Mom will be back soon." But Nathan wouldn't listen. He shook his head violently, his tiny fists still pounding on the window as though he wanted to break it down. "No, I don't want you to go. Please don't go." Nathan's cries were like thunder to Emily's ears, making her heart ache. She shut her eyes, trying to swallow the lump in her throat, but the tears betrayed her, rolling down her cheeks. Mrs. Linda, their neighbor, who had always stood by Emily, moved forward, pulling Nathan into her arms, trying to hold him still. "Nathan, calm down, my love," she said, her voice soft yet filled with sorrow. "Your mom will be fine. We need to be strong for her, okay?" But Nathan struggled, trying to break free from her grasp. "I want Mom," he yelled, his tears soaking his little face. Mrs. Linda, unable to bear the sight, turned to the two police officers, her eyes blazing with anger. "Can't you see? This isn't a family of intruders. This boy is panicking and you still think you're doing the right thing? Let Emily go." Officer Martinez, who had been hesitant from the start, glanced at the scene before him, clearly moved. He lowered his head, speaking quietly but tensely. "John, I think we need to stop. This isn't right. This kid can't be faking it, and everyone here knows they're a family." Reynolds, still trying to maintain his tough exterior, responded coldly, "Procedure is the procedure. If we let emotions get in the way, we won't get anything done." Emily, sitting in the car, saw the brief hesitation in Martinez's eyes. She summoned all her remaining strength, shouting through the glass, "Please, look at the reality. This is my home. My son is right there. How can you do this to us?" The crowd around them grew larger, whispers turning into clear protests. A young neighbor raised their phone high, shouting, "We're all recording. If you don't let her go, everything will go online. This is blatant discrimination." Nathan, despite being held tightly by Mrs. Linda, kept looking back at his mother through the window. His eyes were filled with tears, but within them was a fear Emily had never wanted to see in her son. "Mom, promise me. Will you come back?" Nathan choked, his voice growing quieter but still full of trust in his mother. Emily forced a smile, though her lips trembled. "I promise, my love. I'll be back. Everything will be okay." Those words weren't just a promise to Nathan, but a promise to herself. Emily knew she had to stand up, not just for her honor, but for Nathan, so he would never have to live in fear like this again. At that moment, a strong determination rose within her. She took a deep breath, trying to suppress the tears, thinking to herself, I will fight. Not just for myself, but for all the children like Nathan, so they will never witness this again. Outside the car, Mrs. Linda continued to hold Nathan, her gaze fixed firmly on the two officers. I hope you know what you're doing, she said, her voice full of defiance. Officer Martinez turned to Reynolds, clearly feeling the pressure from both the crowd and the increasingly uncontrollable situation. We can't keep doing this, John. If this is a mistake, it'll ruin our careers. Reynolds said nothing, but his face started to harden, a sign of hesitation. Meanwhile, Emily sat in the car, her gaze on her son, silently promising, I'll never let this tear our family apart. Nathan, I promise. Emily sat in the patrol car, her eyes never leaving Nathan, but inside, a fierce internal struggle raged. She knew she couldn't let this continue for even another minute. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, then turned to the window where Officer Reynolds was standing. Listen to me, she said, her voice clear and stronger now. I'm Emily Carter, wife of Captain William Carter, head of the Westwood Police Department. Call him right now, and you'll understand that you've made a huge mistake. Reynolds, distractedly eyeing the growing crowd, suddenly turned and looked at Emily through the window, his gaze dripping with sarcasm. He took a step closer to the car, bent down, and smirked. Captain Carter's wife, huh? Do you think we're naive enough to believe that? Reynolds sneered. If you are his wife, I think we'd know by now. Everyone knows who he is. Don't think you can use his name to get out of this. Emily suppressed the anger rising within her, trying to keep her voice steady. You don't need to believe me right now. Just take the radio and call the dispatcher. It will only take 5 minutes, but it could save you from the consequences you're about to face. Reynolds crossed his arms, standing tall with a look of unyielding resolve. I don't have time for these games. You'll be explaining everything at the station. That's the procedure. Martinez, who had been standing by from the beginning, clearly wavered. He glanced at Reynolds, then turned to Emily. John, Martinez said, his voice softer. Maybe we should check. If she is Captain Carter's wife, we have no obligation to verify anything on site. Reynolds cut him off, his tone icy. We go by the report. If there's a mistake, it'll be handled at the station. No more arguments. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She slammed her hand against the window, her eyes fixed on Reynolds, her voice sharp with determination. You're making a huge mistake. I've stated who I am. I asked you to verify it, but you refused. If you don't do it now, I promise you'll regret it. Reynolds frowned, clearly thrown off by Emily's unwavering confidence, but he still kept his cold demeanor. Look, if you keep making this harder, I'll add obstruction to your file. Don't think I won't. That threat only fueled the fire. Emily leaned back in her seat, trying to control her emotions. Through the glass, she saw the crowd outside growing larger. Some neighbors started shouting louder. This is Emily Carter. Everyone knows her. Please double-check. An older man in the crowd shouted angrily, This is her home. Why aren't you doing your job properly and sticking to the rules? Martinez, unable to ignore the pressure from both Emily and the crowd, finally said, John, it's just one call. We lose nothing. If she's lying, we can continue. But if she's right, we'll be in big trouble. Reynolds looked at Martinez with clear disapproval, but finally sighed. He grabbed the radio, his voice reluctant. Fine, but I'm warning you. If this is just a bluff, she won't get away with it. Emily sat up straight, her eyes resolute, her face a mix of confidence and righteous anger. She stared at Reynolds, her voice unshaken. You'll have to learn to take responsibility. One day, you'll realize that procedures can't hide injustice. Reynolds pressed the button on the radio and spoke curtly. "Dispatcher, verify a woman named Emily Carter, who claims to be the wife of Captain William Carter. Request urgent confirmation." A flat voice came over the radio. "Received. Please hold for a moment." At that moment, everything seemed to freeze. All eyes were on Reynolds and Martinez. The crowd grew quieter, only murmurs remaining. Emily felt her heart race, but she showed no sign of worry. She knew the truth would come out, and that would change everything. But she also knew that what she wanted wasn't just to prove herself right. It was to expose a larger issue, the injustice she and people like her had to endure every day. And then the radio crackled again. "Confirmation. Emily Carter is the wife of Captain William Carter. Immediate release requested and awaiting further instructions." The words were like a thunderclap in the sky. Reynolds stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. Martinez took a step back, clearly overwhelmed by what he had just heard. Inside the car, Emily stared directly at Reynolds without uttering a word, but her gaze seemed to say, "I warned you." When the voice from the radio crackled again, confirming that Emily was indeed the wife of Captain William Carter, the space around them seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Everyone, from the crowd of neighbors to the two police officers, fell silent, stunned by the truth that had just been revealed. Reynolds stood motionless, his hand still holding the radio, his eyes vacant as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Martinez, who had been wavering before, now took a step back, his face showing clear signs of confusion and embarrassment. Outside, the silence didn't last long. The crowd quickly erupted into an angry wave. Shouts and criticisms grew louder. "See? We told you. She told you to check from the start. Why did you have to wait until now? What are you doing? This is clear racism." A man in the crowd raised his phone and shouted, "Everything is recorded. It's all going online. We won't let this go." Reynolds, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead, turned to Martinez, his voice trembling. We were just following protocol. This is a mistake. We didn't know." But before he could finish, the door of the patrol car swung open. Emily stepped out, standing tall, her cold gaze sweeping over the two officers. "I told you," she said, her voice clear and strong, but not raised. "You will regret your actions." Her words hit like a sentence, resonating through the tense air. Reynolds lowered his head, while Martinez could only stand there, motionless. Emily turned to face the crowd, her eyes meeting each person looking at her with empathy and anger on her behalf. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice filled with confidence and determination. "This is not just about me," she said, her voice ringing out, causing the crowd to fall silent to listen. "Today, I'm the one humiliated in front of my son, treated like a criminal in my own home. But you know what? I'm not the first. And if we don't do something, I won't be the last." The crowd nodded, some people shouting, "That's right. We're here for you." Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "We've suffered enough. These actions are not mistakes. They are the result of prejudice, of injustice ingrained in the system. We cannot remain silent anymore." At this moment, Reynolds turned to Martinez, trying to find an excuse. We didn't intend to offend. This was just..." Emily cut him off, her sharp gaze fixing directly on him. "Your intentions don't matter. The result was that I was handcuffed in front of my son. The result is that you ignored everything I said, all the clear evidence from this community. That is unacceptable." Suddenly, applause erupted from the crowd, quickly spreading. The cheers and clapping gave Emily new strength. At that moment, A black SUV with the police department's logo screeched to a halt at the scene. When the vehicle stopped, the door swung open and a man stepped out. It was Captain William Carter, a tall figure with a cold face and eyes full of authority. "William," Emily called, her voice finally softening as if her strength was renewed by the sight of her husband. Captain Carter walked directly toward Reynolds and Martinez, ignoring the tension surrounding them. His sharp gaze swept over the two officers, his voice low but powerful. "Who is responsible here?" Reynolds stepped forward, stammering, "Sir, this is a mistake. We were just—" "A mistake?" Carter interrupted, his voice filled with restrained anger. "A mistake you didn't bother to check her identity? A mistake that led to handcuffing my wife in front of my son? This isn't a mistake. It's negligence." Martinez, standing beside him, lowered his head, trying to speak but failing to find words. Captain Carter looked directly at Reynolds, his voice cutting through the air. "Uncuff her. Now." Reynolds, his face flushed, hurriedly stepped forward to remove the cuffs from Emily. As the cuffs fell to the ground, Emily gently rubbed her wrists, then lifted her head to look straight at Reynolds. "Remember this moment," she said, her voice unwavering. "It will be a lesson you will never forget." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. The words of sympathy and support for Emily rang out endlessly. But in her eyes there was no joy, only determination. She knew that what had just happened was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. Suddenly, a black SUV with the police department logo rushed to the scene, the sound of its tires screeching on the road silencing the crowd. The door of the vehicle opened, and from inside, Captain William Carter stepped out, tall and upright in his neat police uniform. His face was cold, but his eyes showed restrained anger like a storm waiting to explode. All eyes turned toward Captain Carter, and the crowd seemed to part, giving him space as he walked toward Reynolds and Martinez. Emily, still standing tall among the neighbors, looked at her husband with a mixture of relief and pain. William stopped in front of the two officers, his gaze like a blade sweeping over each of them. Reynolds, though trying to maintain a tough exterior, was losing his composure, while Martinez kept his head down, avoiding his superior's gaze. "Explain," William said, his voice deep but commanding. "Why was my wife, handcuffed in front of her own home, in front of my son and all our neighbors?" Reynolds stammered, trying to find an excuse. "Sir, we were just following protocol. We received a report about an intruder and she matched the description." William raised his hand to cut him off. "Protocol? You call this protocol?" His voice rose, filled with fury. "Is your protocol to arrest a woman without checking her identity? To ignore her explanations? To humiliate her in front of her son?" Reynolds lowered his head, but William wouldn't let him off. "Do you know what she said to you? She asked you to check. She clearly stated her identity. And what did you do? Ignored it. You didn't even bother to verify anything." The crowd around them began to murmur, and many shouted in unison, "That's what happened." Martinez, unable to stay silent anymore, softly spoke up. "Sir, I suggested checking, but we were pressured by the initial report and—" William turned to Martinez, his voice full of disappointment. "Pressure? Do you think that's a valid reason to insult and humiliate an innocent person? My wife is not a thief. She's a mother, hosting a birthday for her son, and you turned that day into a nightmare for our family." Martinez lowered his head, unable to respond, while Reynolds continued to try to justify himself. "We didn't mean to offend, sir. This was just a mistake." William looked straight at him, his eyes burning with intensity. "A mistake? You call this a mistake? Don't you understand? This is not just carelessness. It's irresponsibility and prejudice. Don't think you can call it a mistake and hope it will fade away." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Some shouted, "That's right. Don't let them get away with it." William raised his hand to signal for silence. He turned back to look at Reynolds and Martinez, his voice now slow but sharp. "I won't let this end here. You will be held accountable, not just to me, but to this entire community." He scanned the neighbors standing around and then turned back to the two officers. "I'm requesting that you write a full and clear report on what happened, effective immediately, and from now on, you're suspended pending an investigation. Do you understand?" Reynolds tried to say something, but the words caught in his throat when he saw the unwavering determination in William's eyes. Finally, he nodded, his voice barely audible. "Yes, sir." Martinez also mumbled, "Understood, sir." William turned to Emily, his gaze softening slightly when he saw her still standing firm. He walked toward her, placing his hand on her shoulder, his voice warm. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded, but her voice remained resolute. "We won't let this stop here, William. This is not just about me. It's about everyone who has been treated like this." William squeezed her shoulder, his eyes filled with empathy and determination. "I know," he said. "We won't stay silent." The crowd cheered even louder, with some shouting, "We're here for you, Emily. We won't let this go." William looked back at Reynolds and Martinez one last time before speaking with authority. "I'll make sure this is handled properly. But remember this, there will be no tolerance for any irresponsible behavior in my police department." Then he placed his hand on Emily's back and led her away from the scene. Nathan, held by Mrs. Linda, rushed forward and hugged his mother tightly. "Mom!" the boy cried, his tears still flowing. Emily knelt, holding her son tightly in her arms, tears finally streaming down her face. "Mom's here, Nathan. Everything will be okay, sweetheart." In the embrace of her family and the support of the community, Emily felt a new strength. This was not just the end of a painful moment. It was the beginning of a fight for justice that would not fade away. William turned to look at the crowd, his voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "I know what happened today is unacceptable. I apologize to all of you and especially to my wife, Emily, for the failure of the system that I am responsible for. But I promise you, this will not be forgotten. There will be change, and those responsible will face the consequences." The sound of applause and cheers erupted from the crowd like thunder. A woman shouted, "Thank you, Captain Carter. We trust you." William turned to look at Emily, his gaze softening. He stepped forward, placing his hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with resolve. "I promise you, this is not the end. I will do everything in my power to ensure that people like you, like us, will never have to go through this again." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with appreciation but also determination. "We will fight, William. This is not just about me or our family. This is about everyone who has ever been treated unfairly. And we will not stop." The two of them stood side by side, surrounded by the support of the community, a declaration that the fight against injustice had only just begun. Emily stood in the middle of the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces full of empathy, anger, and hope around her. Her posture was straight, her shoulders still bearing the marks of the handcuffs, but her voice, when it rose, was strong like a flame, burning away the injustice she had just endured. "Today, I stand before you not just as a mother, a wife, or a neighbor," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the utter silence. "I stand here as someone who has been wronged, right here in what should have been my home, in front of my son, and before those who have lived with me for years. But what hurts even more is that this is not the first time this has happened. And I know, if we do nothing, it will not be the last. The crowd seemed to hold its breath, listening intently. A few people nearby nodded, their eyes full of empathy as they looked at Emily. "Look at me today," Emily continued, her eyes shining with resolve. "Today I have been humiliated, insulted by prejudices, by irresponsibility, and by a system that has grown accustomed to ignoring the voices of people like me. But tomorrow, this could happen to any one of you, no matter who you are, where you live, or what you've done for this community." She looked around, her gaze meeting that of Mrs. Linda and those neighbors who had spoken out in her defense from the beginning. "And if we don't speak up, if we choose to remain silent, then the injustice will not stop. It will continue, devastating more families, more lives." A few murmurs rose in the crowd, the anger beginning to spread. A man in the back shouted, "We've seen this too many times. This isn't just about today. It's been happening for a long time." Emily nodded, pointing at the man who had spoken, her voice growing stronger. "That's right. This has been going on for too long. We've stayed silent for too long. I cannot change what happened to me today, but I can do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen again." She paused, her eyes turning to Nathan, who was still standing close to Mrs. Linda with tears in his eyes. "I do this not only for myself, but for my son, for future generations. I don't want Nathan to grow up in a world where he has to fear being judged by the color of his skin, where he has to explain his very presence in the house he grew up in." Nathan looked up at her, his eyes full of admiration and love. Emily turned back to face the crowd, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want any other child, any other family to go through this pain. But I can't do it alone. We need to unite. We need to stand up together, not just to protect ourselves, but to demand a better, fairer society for all of us." A single clap rang out, then two, then three. The applause spread like a wave through the crowd. Neighbors nodded, some shouting, "We stand with you, Emily." But Emily wasn't done. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining like a torch in the dark of night. "Change doesn't come from those in power," she said, her voice carrying weight. "It comes from us, from this community, from our unity. We cannot just criticize or blame without acting. We must demand accountability. We must demand change." A young woman, standing nearby, holding her child tightly, began to cry. "You're right, Emily. We can't let this continue. We won't stay silent anymore." Mrs. Linda stepped forward, placing her hand on Emily's shoulder, her eyes red. "We've always been here for you, Emily," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You've always protected this community, and now it's our turn to stand with you." A loud cheer erupted from the crowd, voices in unison shouting, "We won't stay silent anymore. We will fight." Emily looked around, feeling the power of unity. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, but her gaze still burning with determination. "Thank you all," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for choosing to stand up. This is what we need, the strength of the community. And I promise you, we will not stop until everyone is treated fairly, no matter who they are." William, standing behind her, placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, his eyes filled with pride. He looked at the crowd and added, his voice ringing out, "She's right. Change doesn't come from just one person. It comes from all of us. We will do everything we can to ensure justice is served, not just here, but everywhere." The crowd responded with louder cheers and clapping. Several neighbors stepped forward, embracing Emily, patting her on the back as if to give her even more strength. Nathan ran over, hugging his mother tightly, his small voice filled with trust. "I'm proud of you, Mom." Emily bent down, hugging her son tightly, the tears finally falling. But these were tears of strength, hope, and determination. In the arms of her family and surrounded by the strong support of the community, Emily felt a new strength. She was no longer just a victim of injustice, but now she was a symbol of the struggle, of hope, and of the belief that unity could change everything. The next morning, the story of Emily and the injustice she had endured spread like wildfire on social media. A video recorded by neighbors showing Emily being handcuffed right in front of her house, along with her strong words to the crowd, quickly garnered millions of views and shares. Hashtags like Justice for Emily and End Racial Profiling trended, with countless posts expressing outrage and support for her. The images and video not only stirred public opinion, but also attracted media attention. Major news outlets began posting about the incident, interviewing Emily's neighbors, and airing the video on national TV channels. The outrage from the community wasn't confined to Emily's neighborhood. It spread across the country. Public pressure forced the Westwood Police Department to act immediately. That afternoon, Captain William Carter held a press conference outside the police station. In a room packed with reporters, William stepped up to the podium with a serious demeanor. He was dressed in a neat police uniform, but his eyes clearly showed determination and responsibility. "On behalf of the Westwood Police Department, I would like to extend my sincere apologies to Emily Carter, her family, and the entire community," William said, his voice low but authoritative. "What happened yesterday is unacceptable. It was not just a personal mistake, but a failure of the system that we are responsible for improving." William paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the reporters who were attentively recording his every word. "I want to publicly announce that, effective immediately, the two officers involved in this incident, John Reynolds and Michael Martinez, have been suspended pending an internal investigation. This investigation will be carried out thoroughly and transparently, and those who violated the rules will be held accountable under the law." William continued, his tone becoming stronger. "But this is not just an issue of two individuals. This is a matter of an entire system. I commit that our police department will implement comprehensive reforms to ensure that such behavior is never repeated. We will organize mandatory training on unconscious bias and fair treatment. We will establish an independent oversight mechanism to monitor the actions of the police force." William's words were not just an apology. They were a declaration of major change. He knew the public was watching every step of the police department, and he had to prove they were genuinely listening. After the press conference, a wave of positive reactions from the community began to appear. Many people felt hopeful upon seeing a leader who was willing to confront the issue and commit to making changes. On social media, the hashtag #WeStandWithEmily continued to spread, but this time accompanied by messages supporting the announced reforms. Emily also received numerous messages from strangers. They thanked her for speaking out, for being brave enough to stand up not just for herself, but for all those who had been treated unfairly. Some even shared their own stories, recounting times they had faced discrimination but had no opportunity to fight back. Meanwhile, Reynolds and Martinez faced fierce criticism. Reynolds, who had tried to justify his actions with the excuse of procedure, became the target of much condemnation. His photos were shared online, accompanied by harsh words about his cold and irresponsible behavior. Martinez, though he expressed regret over the incident, was also not spared from the pressure. Some defended him, claiming he had tried to stop Reynolds' actions, but most believed his silence at that moment was also part of the problem. In the following days, Emily became a symbol of the fight against injustice. She participated in several media interviews but always emphasized that this was not just her story. "This is not just about me," she said during a live interview. "This is about all those who have been treated unfairly but didn't have the chance to speak up. I am grateful that my story has been heard, but I hope this will not just end with attention. We need real change, and that starts with reforms in the system." Emily's case not only led to changes in the Westwood Police Department, but also sparked a wave of reform in many other places. Police departments across the country began holding discussions on bias and accountability, with some even enacting new policies to enhance transparency and accountability. For Emily, this was not just a personal victory, but the beginning of a long fight. She knew there was still much work to be done, but now she was not alone. The community had rallied behind her, and her story had become a beacon for others. "We cannot change the past," Emily said during a community gathering, "but we can build a fairer future together." Her words, like her story, continued to spread, igniting the hope that justice is not a distant dream, but something that can be achieved when people unite and speak out. That evening, the warm lights from Emily and William's house shone brightly, spreading throughout the neighborhood. In front of the house, neighbors had gathered, bringing food, flowers, and heartfelt words of encouragement. Mrs. Linda, who had strongly defended Emily from the beginning, stood by a small table on the porch, arranging the plates of cakes and cups of water that everyone had brought. The scene today was a far cry from the chaos and tension of the day before. Children were playing on the lawn while adults chatted, sharing their feelings about what had happened. They were not just here to show support, but to demonstrate that this community was more united than ever before. Inside the house, Emily was preparing tea. When she stepped out with the tray in her hands, the crowd fell silent, their eyes turning to her with respect. Mrs. Linda stepped forward, taking Emily's hand, her voice full of emotion. "Emily, we are here today because we want you to know that you are not just a neighbor. You are the heart of this community. What you have gone through is not only your pain, but all of ours. But thanks to your resilience, we feel stronger, more united." Emily gently squeezed Mrs. Linda's hand, her eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you all," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I couldn't have made it through yesterday without everyone's support. You all stood up for me, for my family, and that means more than anything." The crowd began clapping, with some shouting, "We're always here for you, Emily." Nathan, the little boy who had experienced the most fear in his life, was standing at the corner of the yard holding Lisa's hand. When he saw his mother approach, he let go of Lisa's hand and ran to embrace her. "Mom, you're okay, right?" Nathan whispered, his voice small but full of relief. Emily bent down, hugging her son tightly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. We're all okay now," she said, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of happiness and relief. William walked over, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder and gently stroking their son's head. "We're a strong family," he said, his eyes filled with pride, "and we'll never let anything break that." A young neighbor standing nearby spoke up. "Emily, William, you don't just have your small family. All of us here are your family. We will not let this injustice happen again, not just to you, but to anyone." Emily stood up straight, looking around the crowd, feeling the strength and unity in the air. "Yesterday, I said change starts with the community," she said, her voice stronger. "And today, you've proven that I was right. We cannot remain silent in the face of injustice. We must speak out. We must act. and we must ensure that no one is left behind." William nodded, continuing his wife's words. "I promise, as a husband, a father, and a leader in this police department, I will do everything to ensure justice is served. But that can't happen without your support. Our unity is our greatest strength." The crowd chorused, "We will not be silent." The gathering ended with laughter and hopeful eyes. People left, but no one felt this was the end. They knew that today something had changed in this community, and perhaps in society as a whole. When the house returned to quiet, Emily and William stood together on the porch, watching Nathan play with the birthday toys he hadn't opened the day before. William turned to Emily, his voice calm but certain. "This isn't the end. You know that, right?" Emily nodded, her eyes full of determination. "Yes, but it's the beginning, and we won't stop. Not just for ourselves, but for all those who need us." Under the warm light of the porch lamp, they stood together, hand in hand, as a statement that justice is not a distant dream. It is something they will fight for. The story ends with a powerful message. Don't stay silent in the face of injustice. Act for a fairer society. Emily's